Oh wait, this is actually fantastic. I love this lighting right here. Coercion, because if I am choosing to consent, I wanted to watch the film to get like a cold slap of reality. Hot water, so I am literally sweating buckets. The whole club was looking and was looking at her. So I've gotten a question recently asking, what do I think about intersex people? And my response to that is, I love them, I think they're people too, I believe we Christians should share the gospel with them as freely and openly as we share the gospel with all non-believers. Yes, by the way, this is a Christian channel, I have made this clear in my YouTube bio, in my first video on this channel. This is a Christian channel, so thank you for joining. Now, I get the sense, though, that this is not the question they're looking for. I get the sense that when you ask, what do I think about intersex people, you're asking,
so, do you believe intersex people exist?
Do you think they're a third sex?
do you think sex is a spectrum? And more recently, I've been getting a few people in comment sections on YouTube and on Instagram letting me know that transgender people are valid because sex is a spectrum, because this condition and this condition, which I feel like this argument has spawned off TikTok somewhere and mutated so many times that if you look at it from an outside perspective, the argument doesn't even make sense anymore. My question is, if being transgender is the concept of identifying as a gender separate from the one you were assigned at birth, why does it matter whether sex is a spectrum or not, if sex isn't, like, the main factor of being trans? Anyway, I've been getting some well-intentioned comments recently trying to prove sex is a spectrum to me, sex being like your biological sex, by giving examples of intersex conditions, therefore proving that sex is a spectrum. For this part of the video, I wanted to debunk some quick misconceptions. The first thing I see almost every time somebody tries to prove that third sexes exist is they bring up the conditions Klinefelter syndrome and Turner syndrome. Now, Klinefelter syndrome and Turner syndrome are both aneuploidies. Now, what is an aneuploidy? In every human, there are cells, and in the nucleus of every cell is DNA. This DNA is packed into 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs except for the last pair, which is XY typically in males and XX in females. Now, an aneuploidy occurs when there are more than 46 chromosomes or fewer than 46 chromosomes. For instance, Down syndrome is an aneuploidy where there is an extra copy of chromosome 21. Klinefelter syndrome is an aneuploidy where there is an extra X chromosome in males. This does not make them intersex because Klinefelter's only affects males and Turner's only affects females. Klinefelter syndrome causes males to be abnormally tall, go through incomplete puberty, they don't have enough testosterone in them to stop their growth spurt so that they end up growing taller than they would have originally. As a result, they usually have weaker bones, weaker muscles, less body hair, higher voices. They often have gynecomastia, which is breast growth in males, which a lot of males without Turner syndrome have if they don't have enough testosterone in them. This does not make them any less male, and it is actually offensive to suggest that men with Klinefelter syndrome are less male because they have an extra X chromosome. It's just the mutation that gives them slightly more feminine characteristics. They are still 100% male. Similarly, Turner syndrome is a condition that causes women to be shorter on average, having a harder time getting fertile if they are even fertile at all, defined facial features such as epicanthal folds, or neck webbing that's usually surgically removed as an infant, lower ears, a lower hairline, incomplete female puberty, etc. They are not any more masculine than women without Turner syndrome, and it is also offensive to suggest that they are somehow more masculine than other women by having one less X chromosome. I do know of one woman with Turner syndrome who identifies as non-binary. The vast majority of women with Turner syndrome are comfortable being women, and they are no less women than women without Turner syndrome. Another common thing I often see mistaken as an intersex condition is men who have two X chromosomes and women who have XY chromosomes. This is a phenomenon where you have to separate the SRY gene from the Y chromosome. So what defines a male is the Y chromosome, but specifically a gene on the Y chromosome that causes all the male characteristics to develop, and that's the SRY gene. Now, if you take the SRY gene and put it on a karyotype with two X chromosomes, that human with two X chromosomes becomes a male because of that functioning SRY gene. Similarly, if you take a karyotype with XY chromosomes and remove the SRY gene, that baby will develop into a girl and then a woman. This is not an intersex condition. These are full and complete men and women that just happen to have the opposite chromosomes of what you'd expect because of a translocation of the SRY gene. This is not an intersex condition. This is not a third sex. That was pretty straightforward. I wouldn't consider these conditions intersex whatsoever, and I do find it really annoying whenever people bring up these conditions as if this is proof that A, a third sex exists, and B, that these are even intersex, because it shows a lack of knowledge of basic genetics that I have known since I was 12 years old.
I was also a bit of a nerd.
If you look at all the disorders of sexual development, most of these conditions are simply just differences in genitalia or in hormones. For instance, there's a condition called aphalia in males, which is when biological males with testes and male hormones,
they're born without the phallus part of their genitalia.
A similar condition is Mullerian agenesis in women, where they are born without a uterus. They are biological females, have the hormones and genetics for being women, but they just lack this part that most women do have. A lot of people define maleness versus femaleness as potential to produce sperm versus the potential to produce eggs. I like to define it as
being genetically and phenotypically male
versus genetically and phenotypically female.
Genotypically, it refers to your DNA, what your DNA codes for. Does your DNA code for a man or a woman? Phenotypically is what your body looks like. Are you born looking male or are you born looking female? So far, I've been talking about people who are genetically male and female, who have the genes, regardless of what they would normally look like, the genes that code for a male or female body, plus they have the body type. They have a male or female body, even if that looks a little bit different than a typical male or female body. Probably one of the most mainstream intersex conditions is called complete androgen insensitivity syndrome. It's a type of androgen insensitivity syndrome where people are essentially immune to some degree to androgens, such as testosterone and dihydrotestosterone. If you have partial androgen insensitivity syndrome, you're probably going to look
mostly male with some slight feminine characteristics.
If you have complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, you are going to look phenotypically female. Now, people with CAIS have male genetics. They have XY chromosomes, they have the SRY gene, they have the testes that produce hormones. The difference is that their body is female. They develop breast tissue, they have a wider waist, they have less body hair, and they don't develop a deeper voice. In fact, they look just like any other woman in the world, except they just don't have periods and they don't have body hair,
which frankly is really lucky.
Their body's receptors do not respond to male hormones and turn the male hormones into female hormones. I would consider these people women because they move and interact with the world as women. I do know of one woman with complete androgen insensitivity syndrome who identifies as non-binary, but also she was put through a bunch of sex changes throughout her childhood and teen years, and she is a butch lesbian, so it makes sense that she wouldn't really connect with being a woman at all. These people are not a third sex. They are women whose hormones come from their testes instead of their ovaries, which sounds kind of silly to say. Finally, this is a pretty rare but actually fascinating condition that a lot of people don't talk about. Its medical name is 5-alpha reductase enzyme deficiency, but in layman's terms, it's known as guetavoches. This is a really rare disorder that basically looks like little girls growing up and going through male puberty. It occurs in small communities in the Dominican Republic and I think the Philippines, various other places around the world.
A lot of these people have parents who are cousins.
These are boys who, in the womb, they develop without the hormone called dihydrotestosterone. That is the hormone responsible for giving a boy the primary sex characteristics. So primary sex characteristics are what make you look like a boy or a girl. Secondary sex characteristics are what make you look like a man or a woman. So without the dihydrotestosterone, these boys are born looking as if they don't have male genitalia. That develops in their teen years when they go through puberty. So it looks as if they're girls turning into boys, but what they are is they're actually boys with an enzyme deficiency. It looks like an intersex condition, but ultimately, at the end of the day, these are male. much every single intersex condition affects males and females differently. Now, what a lot of people think of when they think of intersex is they think of when a human being has both sets of private parts or both sets of gonads, and that is a condition called ovotesticular syndrome. It's extremely rare. I don't think there are any cases of people born with functional ovaries and testes together, but these are people born with the tissue of both. And even if there were people who were born with fully functioning ovaries and fully functioning testes, this does not make them a third sex. This makes them a human who has a condition that makes them born with a blend of the two sexes, because there are ovaries and there are testes. There are eggs and there are sperm. There is no third gonad, there is no third sex cell, there is no third option. Intersex people have a blend of both characteristics. That is just further proof that sex is not a spectrum, but sex is binary. Now that I've basically explained that intersex conditions existing is not necessarily proof that sex is a spectrum, I want to talk about some controversy that has to do with intersex conditions. Now, a lot of people would classify intersex as a part of the L+ community, LGBTQIA+, etc. However, even though it's not my place to say, my personal opinion is that intersex does not actually fit the category of the L+ community, because everything within the L+ community is a lifestyle choice. You can't choose to have gender dysphoria, but you can choose to transition. You can't choose to be attracted to the same sex, but you can choose to date the same sex. With being intersex, you cannot choose to be intersex. You have this body that you didn't ask for. You have these functions that you didn't ask for. Now, a lot of people will say that it's offensive to consider intersex people part of the L+ community, and I wouldn't go that far because there are quite a few intersex people on YouTube who do consider themselves part of the L+ community by virtue of being intersex, so I don't think it's necessarily offensive. I think different people have different preferences. Now, even though they aren't necessarily parts of the L+ community, intersex people do actually struggle with a pretty big form of discrimination.
Childhood sex changes.
It's extremely common for intersex babies, and even babies who aren't intersex, to be born with ambiguous genitalia and to have that corrected by doctors. Ambiguous genitalia is when an infant is born with genitalia that looks too small to be male genitalia, but too big to be female genitalia. What often happens is doctors, even without the parents' consent, will put the 1 to 2 day old baby under the knife to give them more normal-looking genitalia. I don't think you should be surgically performing on children without their consent if it isn't, like, life-saving or at least medically necessary or has medical benefits. For instance, I'm gonna get so much fighting in the comment section if people actually watch this part. Circumcision. I think there are medical benefits to circumcision, and I am pro parents circumcising their child at 8 days old. I'm also kind of biased because I am Jewish, ethnically speaking. But yeah, that's my opinion. I am pro-circumcision. Go crazy in the comment section. There are two main reasons why doctors would be performing sex changes on babies with ambiguous genitalia. The first is so that they look normal.
And I think that's really stupid,
because children cannot consent to aesthetic surgeries. Second of all, a lot of doctors will perform sex changes upon very young children so that they can have normal sex when they're older, which again, the children cannot consent to this. That is a decision a sexually active adult should be making. It's so loud, I'm literally outside. What was I talking about? When you perform sex changes on children, what often happens is these babies aren't even intersex at all. You have doctors looking at a baby without even taking a blood test to know what the DNA is and being like,
okay, I think it'd be easier to turn that into male genitalia. I think it would be easier to turn that into female genitalia.
And then boom, you've just given a little boy a neovag, you've just given a little girl a phalloplasty.
That's horrible medical malpractice.
Another pretty controversial operation that is usually performed on young girls with, as I mentioned previously, CAIS, is these girls will have undescended testes, and sometimes they're
Visible in your abdomen, like right here.
frequently, doctors will not tell the girls that they have an intersex condition, and they will say,
Oh, your ovaries are precancerous, so we're going to remove them so you don't get cancer.
what they're actually doing is they're removing the testes from these girls and putting them on supplements for the rest of their lives, even though the girls have no idea what's going on. And it is true that women who have undescended testes are possibly going to get cancer from them, but if there's no cancer risk, then you shouldn't remove them. Because if you remove them, that's where you're getting your hormones. If these women aren't getting hormones from these undescended testes, then they have to go on supplements. And when you get your sex hormones from supplements, there are usually negative side effects. It's so much healthier to let your body just naturally produce hormones the way it does, even if it looks weird to other people. I remember reading a novel called None of the Above, which actually explores a couple of the controversial surgeries that I just mentioned. One of them being a girl who is 18 wants to begin being active with her boyfriend, but it's painful because
what she has that appears to look like what other women have is too small.
So her doctor teaches her to dilate using different medical phallic objects. And I find that pretty controversial because, again, you're just trying to mold your body to have normal sex when there are multiple ways to be intimate with each other that can be just as pleasurable. I feel like it would be better to find something that works for you than to mold your body to fit what appears normal. And that's just my hot take, though, as a sex repulsed asexual. This girl also has another controversial surgery where she removes her testes because they're not aesthetically pleasing. But the thing is, now she has to go on supplements for the rest of her life, and they're giving her headaches, they're kind of changing the metabolism of her body.
Because they're external hormones, they're not natural.
I do think we should normalize healthy bodies functioning healthily, even if it looks different to other people. The last thing I wanted to talk about is, what does the Bible have to say about intersex people? When I was 11 or 12 and first discovering these intersex conditions, I wanted to write a story about an 11-year-old who had an intersex condition where she had a mosaicism. Mosaicism is a condition where some of your cells have a certain set of chromosomes and some of your cells have a different set of chromosomes. For instance, mosaic Down syndrome is when some of your cells will have the extra copy of chromosome 21, but some of your cells don't have that extra copy of chromosome 21. Jamie had a condition where 55% of her cells had XX chromosomes and 45% of her cells had XY chromosomes. And you might look at that and say,
Oh, and she's more genetically female than male.
but at the end of the day, you can't really ignore the fact that when she goes through puberty, she is going to grow up looking very ambiguous. And do we change that? Do we put her on hormone blockers and cross-sex hormones so that she looks like a normal woman or looks like a normal man? And if she lives in the world looking very ambiguous, what is her role in the church? When you're a Christian, the church has roles for men and for women. So is she, because she has 45% male DNA, is she allowed to give sermons? Does she have to live as a woman? Who is she allowed to marry? I don't know, it just sort of interested me because I wanted to have an intersex Christian and explore what that would look like. God has an individual plan for every single individual. If you continue to read the Bible and pray and seek His will, He will reveal the right answer to you. He will provide opportunities in your life for you to exercise your spiritual gifts and allow you to find the perfect role in your church. Now, the Bible doesn't really talk much about intersex people at all. Even though hermaphroditic conditions have existed since the Roman Empire and probably earlier, we've seen evidence with Roman statues, the Bible has pretty much nothing to say about intersex people.
Turn with me in your Bibles to Matthew 9:12.
For there are eunuchs who are born that way, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others, and there are those who choose to live like eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. The one who can accept this should accept it. So essentially, there are people who are born with a disorder of sexual development, there are people who are castrated, which we talk about a bit in Farinelli, and there are people who choose to never have relations with anybody. And the only subject of discussion there is these people don't have to get married. I assume that's because infertile men who have no sex drive were undesirable at the time, likely, because they couldn't carry on their seed. I, for one, find eunuchs very desirable. So you are desired here, you are welcome here. It is a safe space for you.